Herr Ministerpräsident Söder, lieber Markus, Ambassador Ischinger, take my seat, please. Yes, come on here. Secretary General, dear Jens, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the very reason that the Union, the European Union, was once created is that we wanted to put an end to all European wars. And thus, the world has been watching in disbelief as we face the largest buildup of troops on European soil since the darkest days of the Cold War. Because the events of these days could reshape the entire international order. Ukraine has just celebrated its 30 years of independence. There's an entire generation of Ukrainians born and bred in a free country. They are children of democracy. But now they are confronted on a daily basis with external aggression and interference. Some of them have lost relatives or classmates in the Donbas war. They are faced again with the prospect of conscription to fight a war that they don't want, but that Moscow might choose to impose on them. This is what the Kremlin's policies mean in practice. To instill fear and call it security demands, to deny 44 million Ukrainians from deciding freely about their own future, to deny a free country's right to independence and self-determination. And the consequences of this approach matter well beyond Ukraine. The Kremlin is not only trying to undermine the entire European security architecture, the Helsinki principles that have made all European countries safer, including Russia. It is also violating the UN Charter, which states that countries, and I cite, shall refrain from the threat and use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. End of citation. We cannot let this stand. We're facing a blatant attempt to rewrite the rules of the international order. One only has to read the recent communiqué issued by Russian and Chinese leaders. They seek a new era, as they say, to replace the existing international rules. They prefer the rule of the strongest to the rule of law, intimidation instead of self-determination, coercion instead of cooperation. We still hope that peace will prevail and that diplomacy will take us there. And allow me to address how Europe can support this work. First, we should be ready to respond. Our European Union, with our transatlantic partners, we have been preparing a robust package of financial and economic sanctions, including on energy and cutting-edge technology. If the Kremlin strikes, we can impose high costs and severe consequences on Moscow's economic interests. The Kremlin's dangerous thinking, which comes straight out of a dark past, may cost Russia a prosperous future. Second is diversification. A strong European Union cannot be so reliant on an energy supplier that threatens to start a war on our continent. Gazprom, a Russian state-owned company, is deliberately trying to store and deliver as little as possible. While prices and demand are skyrocketing, this is a very strange behavior for a company. We must diversify both our suppliers and our energy sources. And the work is already underway. We have reached out to our partners and friends across the globe, and today I can say that even in case of full disruption of gas supply from Russia, we are on the safe side for this winter. And in the medium and long term, we're doubling down on renewables. Sun, wind, hydropower, green hydrogen. This will increase Europe's strategic independence for energy. My third point is supporting democracy in Ukraine. For 7 years now, the Russian leadership has tried to destabilize Ukraine. Hybrid war, cyber attacks, disinformation, you name it. Yet, the country is now stronger than 7 years ago because it has chosen the path of democracy and the friendship of other democracies. Think again about the youth of Ukraine, the post-Soviet generation. They know that their democracy is not perfect, but it is perfectible, and it is getting stronger year by year. And this is what makes us stand out from autocracies. Thriving democracies are the autocrats' greatest fear, because their propaganda fails when citizens are empowered by the reporting of independent media and the free exchange of ideas. Because free citizens speak truth to power. Because trust and confidence are more sustainable than control and coercion. And this is exactly why Europe is supporting Ukraine's path to democracy. It makes Ukraine a better place to live for its people and a better neighbor for both the European Union and Russia. And my fourth and final point is about unity. Since the start of this Kremlin-made crisis, the European Union and the transatlantic community are fully aligned and united. We're supporting Ukraine to withstand the enormous pressure from Moscow. When a Russian government tried to divide us over and over again, we have responded with one voice and one common message. And this has been possible also thanks to you, dear Jens. You always pushed us to focus on what we have in common. You have shown that the European Union and NATO stand side by side, not only because we share members and allies, but because we share values. That is independence, respect for human rights, freedom, and democracy. The very values that are at stake in this crisis. And this is why it makes me proud and happy to announce that you are this year's Kleist Award winner. You have come a long way to reach this high office. When you were young, you were the head of the Young Socialists in Norway, an organization that at the time was certainly not known to be a strong supporter of NATO, not at all. But young Jens used his charm and his leadership to turn the young Norwegian socialists around in supporters, believe it or not. As Prime Minister of Norway, you, Jens, had to deal with Russia on a regular basis. Actually, by then, Lavrov was already being Lavrov. And yet, you managed with skill to resolve a decades-long territorial dispute in the Barents Sea. Dear Jens, you have always been a man of dialogue and a believer in the transatlantic bond. In almost 10 years at the helm of NATO, you always carried the flame of this unique alliance. Nobody worked harder than you for the transatlantic alliance. You have pushed relentlessly to strengthen our unity. And this is why no one deserves this year's Kleist Award more than you. Congratulations, dear Jens.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. We are now going to have the award ceremony, so may I invite you, Jens, to join us here on the podium. Come on over here, please. Yeah, over there.
Thank you so much.
This is for you and a big, big heart.
Das Dokument.
More important, here's the proof. If we distance a little bit.
Can we take a little distance and then take off the mask like this? Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jens. So now you have the floor. Congratulations. Ja, Sie können gerne gleich hier sitzen bleiben. Ich gehe aber noch, ich setze mich da hin.
Thank you so much, Ursula, for those kind words, and thank you also so much for our very close cooperation over these years. The relationship and the cooperation between NATO and the European Union has never been closer, and that's not least because of your commitment to bringing this relationship so close together and strengthening the transatlantic bond by working together with NATO. And also many thanks to Minister President Söder for your warm welcome here in Munich, and also for informing me that you have danced with President von der Leyen. I have never had the courage, but now maybe. Many thanks to you, Wolfgang, for your outstanding leadership of the Munich Security Conference and for this prestigious award. I am really and greatly honored, and thank you so much. Ewald von Kleist championed the transatlantic alliance. He saw the value of Europe and North America standing together to keep us all safe. His message is as important today. These are dangerous days for Europe. Russia has relentlessly massed troops in and around Ukraine, in the biggest military buildup since the Cold War. We do not know what will happen, but the risk for conflict is real. NATO allies continue their strong diplomatic efforts to find a political solution. However, despite Moscow's claims, we have seen no sign of withdrawal or de-escalation so far. On the contrary, Russia's military buildup continues. We continue to monitor very closely. We call on Russia to do what it says and withdraw its forces from the borders of Ukraine. This will be an important first step towards a peaceful solution. It is not too late for Russia to change course, to step back from the brink, stop preparing for war, and start working for a peaceful solution. NATO remains ready to engage in a substantive dialogue with Moscow, to take meaningful reciprocal steps that can improve security for all countries in Europe and for Russia too. We have made written proposals to Moscow to reduce risks and increase transparency of military activities, address space and cyber threats, and engage on arms control, including on nuclear weapons and missiles. This is a substantial agenda where we believe it is possible to find common ground. So I have invited Russia and all NATO allies to a series of meetings of the NATO-Russia Council. And I reiterated my invitation in the letter that I sent to Minister Lavrov on Thursday. The current crisis is about more than Ukraine. There is much at stake. Relations between NATO and Russia, European and transatlantic security, and ultimately the question of how we wish to organize relations between states. Moscow is attempting to roll back history and recreate its spheres of influence. It wants to limit NATO's right to collective defense and demands that we should remove all our forces and infrastructure from the countries that joined NATO after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But let me be clear. There is no first-class NATO members in the west of the alliance and second-class NATO members to the east. We are all NATO allies, and we stand as one. And we will always do what is necessary to protect and defend each other. Moscow also wants to deny sovereign countries the right to choose their own path and their own security arrangements. For Ukraine, but also for other countries, such as Finland and Sweden. And for the first time, we now see Beijing joining Moscow in calling on NATO to stop admitting new members. It is an attempt to control the fate of free nations, to rewrite the international rulebook, and impose their own authoritarian models of governance. The current crisis demonstrates the importance of the transatlantic relationship for European security. 2 world wars and the Cold War has taught us that there is no real security in Europe without a strong transatlantic bond. Standing together in NATO, Europe and America will continue to keep the peace and protect our democratic way of life, as we have done for more than 70 years. NATO is a defensive alliance. We are not threatening Russia or anyone else. But we will take all necessary measures to protect and defend all allies. This is why, in response to Russia's pattern of aggressive actions, we have been strengthening our deterrence and defense across the alliance to avoid any miscalculation or misunderstanding about our ironclad commitment to defend each other. So if Kremlin's aim is to have less NATO on its borders, it will only get more NATO. And if it wants to divide NATO, it will only get an even more united alliance. Over the last years, our security environment has fundamentally changed for the worse. Peace cannot be taken for granted. Freedom and democracy are contested, and strategic competition is on the rise. This is a new normal, and we must be prepared and do everything we can to keep the bond between America and Europe as strong as ever. After the experience of horrors of war, Ewald von Kleist knew that Europe and America together was the guarantee of lasting peace. It still is today. By standing together, we can and will keep our people safe, protect our core values and principles, and uphold the rules-based international order. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jens, Mr. Secretary General. Thank both of you, Madam President. Maybe this is better without, and you, Mr. Secretary General, for your presentations. We've had a long-standing tradition at the Munich Security Conference that at the main event on Saturday morning, the first question always goes to François Heisbourg of France. Now, François has informed me, I think late last night, that he is actually tested positive. He was already in Munich, so he's now somewhere in quarantine, I guess, but he has sent me overnight the question he had intended to ask by raising his arm as the first one. So this is my privilege now to present his question as the first one. So Francois, I'm sure you're listening. The question is actually asked of the President of the EU Commission, but I think it's also a question that you would want to respond to. And I quote, "Are the European Union and its member states ready to jointly and severally, together and separately, express their support of a possible candidacy of any of the European Union's members to join the Atlantic Alliance?" For those who are not so familiar with this, this is a question about, for example, Finland, a question, for example, of Sweden, for once. So, Madam President.
So, first of all,
it should work just.
You should, yeah. I think it's a very good sign, dear Jens, that Ambassador Ischinger asked this question to the European Union President of the Commission. So it's not for me to judge about internal issues of NATO. But of course, I'm very willing to answer this because indeed, I've been watching in my time as the 5 years as defense minister, being of course in the alliance of NATO, how very close the cooperation, for example, with Sweden and Finland already is of NATO. First and foremost, it is the decision of the people of Sweden and Finland, what they want to do and which kind of alliance or partnerships they prefer. But then, of course, I've witnessed that there is a long-standing excellent cooperation between NATO and those members of the European Union, many missions they are participating in, joint capabilities we're developing. So you are always, of course, emphasizing, rightly so, that there is an open door policy in NATO. And therefore, now, after having spoken for the members of the European Union, I throw the ball to you, Jens, to speak about NATO itself.
Thank you so much, Ursula. And I think the fact that we can answer this question together just demonstrates how closely the relationship is between the European Union and NATO, and also between Ursula and me. As you said, Ursula, the thing is that it is enshrined in NATO's founding treaty, the Washington Treaty, in Article 10, that we have an open door, that European countries can join NATO. But this is, and the enlargement of NATO over the last decades has been a great success. It has helped to spread democracy, freedom throughout Europe, and actually also paved the way for further EU enlargement, demonstrating how closely we work together. In that sense, NATO's open door has been a success, and NATO's door remains open. The important message is that it is for individual countries in Europe to decide whether they aspire for membership, they want to belong to NATO, or they do not want to belong to NATO. That's for them to decide. Therefore, we respect those allies, those countries that aspire for membership. We sit down and we look into how can we help them with reforms so they meet the NATO standards and can join at some stage. But we also respect if they decide not to apply. So, for instance, when Finland and Sweden have decided that they are not applying for membership, of course, we respect also that decision. I will not speculate about the likelihood of Finland and Sweden changing their mind. I think that's very much for it is for Finland and Sweden to decide. That's the main point. And as a Norwegian, I will be very careful giving advice to Swedes and Finns. So we trust the Swedes and the Finns. They decide. As long as they decide to stay outside, we are very happy to have very close cooperation with both countries.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. Now, those of you who wish to ask a question, there are two ways of doing that. First, the Heisboer way, by just waving and making yourself known to me, or by using the electronic manner. I have a tablet here which would show me questions that are being typed electronically. So use the opportunity. Who wishes to raise the first question? I think this is Natalie Tocci, if I'm not mistaken. Natalie, microphone is coming.
Question to President von der Leyen. As your second key word, you mentioned diversification. And it was a word that had disappeared from the European lexicon for a while. Energy security, diversification had really not been talked about for quite some time. How do you square the circle, if there is a circle to be squared, between the return of energy security to the debate through diversification and your landmark, your trademark for this commission, which of course is the European Green Deal?
Yes, thank you very much. I, of course, focus, as your question indicated on our dependency, first of all, on Russian gas. Just to give you figures, round about 24% overall in the energy mix of the European Union is gas. We import 90% of this gas, and 40% of this import is Russian gas, so quite a high dependency. It's very different from member state to member state. For example, as France is relying on nuclear energy, they are not at all dependent on Russian gas. Other member states, for example, Italy or Germany, have a more intense dependency on Russian gas. What we've seen over the last 6 months is that Gazprom has delivered always at the lowest level they have to deliver by contract. They have contracts that say pay or deliver. So often they've chosen the payment instead of to deliver gas. And the storage of Gazprom in our storages is a 10 years low this year. And this at a time, as I said, where we have skyrocketing prices and demand. It's a strange behavior of a company who normally would maximize their profits by delivering more and storing better for winter to come. Therefore, we have decided to do everything possible to get rid of this dependency. And we've reached out to our friends who are suppliers of LNG gas, first and foremost the United States, that really helped a lot, also the reach out globally, but also to other suppliers of LNG. Actually, it helps us that we have done our homework since 2014, the annexation Crimea, because we've built LNG terminals, and more important, we have now a network of pipelines and electricity interconnectors throughout Europe, so that wherever you have the gas, you can display it all over the European Union, partially also a reverse flow, for example, to Ukraine, to support Ukraine with their energy demands. And now to the second part of your question. For the moment being, we would be able to replace the Russian gas with LNG deliveries that we get from our friends all over the world, and we are supported actually also by buyers like Japan or South Korea, who are willing to swap contract with us so that the ships with the LNG gas are derouted to the European Union. Now, LNG gas remains fossil fuel without any question. The advantage is that the infrastructure that we use with the LNG or any kind of gas is over time suitable and fit for purpose for green hydrogen. And therefore now our work goes, and we had yesterday the EU-Africa summit, goes into looking towards the global south. They have in abundance sun and wind and hydropower. They need the infrastructure, but there to have over time the development of a solid green hydrogen infrastructure using the pipelines we do have already in place, and thus giving a complete different business case to the global south, our African friends, for example. Of course, green hydrogen for the European Union too. And I can only say these renewable energies, they are clean and therefore good for the planet, but they are also homegrown and therefore good for our independence.
Thank you, Madam President. I see a couple of more questions. Before I go to you, let me use my privilege of being the moderator here to turn to Jens Stoltenberg again. Jens, you'll be leaving NATO toward the end of this year, as I understand. And I want to remind you that as the future head of the Norwegian Central Bank, like all the other recipients of the Kleist Award, you will have a standing invitation to the Munich Security Conference. It's one of the reasons why Javier is always here each year, and I hope you'll be with us again. Here's my question. 8 years ago, in 2014, NATO decided to define as a collective goal this famous 2% goal. Let's assume the worst case, namely that we're going to have some degree of military confrontation in coming days, weeks, months. As you prepare your own departure from NATO in coming months, would you think that the 2% objective goal, which was a goal for 2024, 10-year goal, is going to be good enough? Or is NATO going to have to say, under these circumstances, we're actually going to have to, take it up another notch? Question.
Well, I think what happens now just underlines how important it was back in 2014 to make the decision to go to 2%. And then I think we should deliver on that first, and then we can discuss the next steps after that. Because what has happened, is that before 2014, defense budgets were going down across Europe and Canada in almost all allied countries. Year by year, because after the end of the Cold War, European countries thought that they could spend less on the defense. And I was part of that myself. I was Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in Norway, and for many years we cut defense spending. But then, after the illegal annexation of Crimea and what happened in Europe in 2014, things changed. And the good thing is that all allies actually realized that we need to do something different. And the most important different thing we had to do was to invest more. And since 2014, all allies in Europe and Canada have increased defense spending every year. And they have in total added 270 billion extra for defense. And of course, this is not only about money, but it's about capabilities, because with this money you can buy drones and planes and battle tanks and readiness and exercises and a lot of important stuff. The main reason to do this is not to provoke a war, but it's to prevent the war. And exactly what is happening now demonstrates that our strength and the fact that we can deploy more troops at high readiness to the eastern part of the alliance is a way to send a very clear message to Moscow that we are there to protect and defend all allies. An attack on one will be regarded as an attack on all. That's exactly the best way to prevent any armed attack on any NATO ally. Well, it just demonstrates that what the decision makers in 2014 decided, they were wise and forward-looking, and former Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen is somewhere here in the audience, and he was responsible then, and many others have been part of that big transformation of NATO.
Thank you very much. Now, I think the first raised hand I saw was Dr. Chipman of IISS. John?
Yes, to Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, in the last 7 or 8 years, as the IISS has transparently recognized in our famous volume, The Military Balance, the Russians have massively modernized their conventional armed forces, introduced lots of technologies and a much more professional army. But in that time as well, they have been modernizing their nuclear weapons, adding more capabilities, changed their doctrine, and only in the next few days we might see the formal change of the Belarus constitution that would permit the stationing of nuclear weapons in Belarus. Against that background, what would you judge to be the first 2 or 3 priorities of the NATO Nuclear Planning Group, and what place would nuclear strategy have in NATO's new strategic concept? And a caveat for the President of the European Commission, the IISS, which is now happy to have a Europe office in Berlin, is working on the subject of green defense. And I wonder, as the President of a geopolitical commission, what collaboration we would be able to have with the European Commission to ensure that militaries continue to green their operations while maintaining their effectiveness. Thank you.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. That what we have seen over the last years is that Russia has invested heavily in modernizing their nuclear capabilities. They have changed their nuclear doctrines, and they have actually lowered the threshold for use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. This is something, of course, we are taking very seriously. And therefore, I think it's important that we maintain our NATO nuclear deterrent, that we make sure that we keep it safe and secure and effective. Also, I think it also demonstrates that what we are in favor of is balanced, reciprocal, verifiable arms control also when it comes to nuclear weapons. But we are not in favor of unilateral nuclear disarmament from the NATO side. NATO's goal is a world without nuclear weapons, but a world where we get rid of our nuclear weapons and China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and so on, they keep their weapons. That's not a safer world. That's a more dangerous world. So yes, we believe in a world without nuclear weapons, but the only way to get there is through verifiable, balanced arms control, and that's exactly what NATO is working for.
Madam.
Yes, thank you. So, John, I think whatever, if you look at the defense sector, whatever is rolling, flying, or swimming needs energy. Energy is the core of any kind of European Green Deal or global Green Deal to fight climate change. And therefore, I was, the other answer already reflecting over changing our posture of energy supply. And whatever goes for fighter jets, as well as any kind of airplanes, goes for cars or armored vehicles, you name it, that you have to change the approach of the energy you use, not the dirty, carbon-heavy, fossil fuel energies, but the renewables, clean ones. And for example, the prospect of hydrogen is a highly interesting one to work with. And therefore, there is quite a lot of music in it. It is a fascinating business case, because for us it's important. We know we have to fight climate change, otherwise we're all doomed. And therefore, if we invest in the innovation, if we invest in clean energy, if we invest in a different way to produce and to consume, we will be the innovators who export then these technologies. It's a big topic of innovation. And therefore, it is for us not only something which is so important for the climate itself, but it's a very clear business case. It's our new growth strategy.
All right. I've seen a few raised hands. The one I know who raised his hand is Stefan Cornelius of Süddeutsche Zeitung. So, Stefan, please.
Thank you. It's a question to the President of the Commission, von der Leyen. Why, since you're displaying unity between the EU and NATO on this stage, why did the EU not call for an earlier meeting on the heads of states? There was now a special summit in the lines of the African Union meeting just a few hours ago. But this crisis is boiling for, I don't know, 2 months at least. And we haven't seen heads of states unifying and at least finding some coherent strategy on sort of the reaction of the day after.
So how are we working? Since many, many weeks, 6 to 8 weeks now, we are preparing for this looming crisis, which is unfortunately, since then, always going in the wrong direction with a massive buildup of troops that has not stopped. And of course, there is a very strong alignment between the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, on a regular basis. We have by now in the last weeks, once or twice a week, a VTC, or yesterday evening, for example, a telephone call together, the countries, Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, Boris Johnson, some of our leaders like Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Mario Draghi. You were, of course, yesterday also. You are on a regular basis in these sessions. This is to align on a regular basis on all the necessary steps we have to take. What are these steps? The Commission has developed a robust and comprehensive package together with the United States, UK and Canada of financial sanctions that in case that Russia strikes, we will limit the access to the financial markets for the Russian economy, and export controls that will stop the possibility for Russia to modernize and diversify its economy. And we have a lot of high-tech goods where we have a global dominance and that are absolutely necessary for Russia and cannot be replaced easily. We also prepare in this group, for example, what is the state of cyber attack robustness and resilience we have within our system, but also supporting Ukraine. We are preparing for potential refugees coming. We are preparing on all sorts of fields. I've been referring to the energy field. So there is a constant alignment, let's say, behind the scene. The European Council will be called within hours if it is necessary to take a political decision in case that Russia is striking or is beginning a war in Ukraine. But all the preparatory work, so the alignment between all these 27 member states, the European Union and the other friends and allies, goes on since weeks and weeks and weeks, and that's where the core of the work is. That's where the bulk of the results is coming from now.
Thank you very much. We have less than 5 minutes to go. I have one question on my tablet here, which is addressed to Secretary General of NATO. Comes from Clemens Vergin, who is a journalist with Die Welt, German newspaper. This goes to Mr. Stoltenberg. I'm quoting, "How can the West counter in the realm of informational measures what seems to be Russian false flag operations in Donbass?"
To expose what they do, and that's exactly what we have done, because we have been very open, transparent on the information we have received, intelligence and other types of information, both about the Russian military buildup, and it is, as Ursula said, this actually started several months ago, this fall, and we already then warned both that we saw a buildup taking place, but also of the plans of further building up. And what we predicted back then has actually happened. Second, we have also been very transparent on the attempts by Russia to create a pretext, to create a situation that they will use as an excuse for attacking Ukraine. And we have seen some attempts, we have seen some very dangerous situations, and also what we see taking place now just adds to that picture of a concern that they are trying to create a pretext for an invasion. But the reason why we have been so transparent, the United States, other allies and NATO, is that we believe that when we expose these plans, we make it harder for them to do what they are planning to do. So the reason to expose is to prevent that from happen that they are planning to do. We are extremely concerned because we see that they continue to build up, they continue to prepare, and we have never in Europe seen, since the end of the Cold War, such a large concentration of combat-ready troops, and of course that sends a very, very ominous or dangerous signal to all of us. Let me add one more thing, Wolfgang, and that is that, you know, what they do in Russia now is partly to mass the troops, but they have also put forward claims, demands, not only to Ukraine, but also to NATO. They have demanded that we should leave our enshrined commitment to open door, and they have demanded that we should remove all NATO troops and forces from almost half of the member states. And then they have said that if we don't meet those demands, they have repeatedly said there will be what they call military technical consequences. So the danger is now the combination of this massive military buildup with the very threatening rhetoric, putting forward demands they know we cannot meet and say if we don't meet them, there will be military consequences. So this is a step change. This is a new normal that you have a Russia which is openly contesting core values for European security and then demonstrating their will to use force or the threat of force to get their will. And that's the reason why it is so extremely important that we are united, Europe and North America, worked closely with the European Union, but also that we actually have demonstrated our commitment with increased military presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
Thank you, Jens. I think we have a minute left. I saw a question from the very back of the room. If you can turn this into a very quick question, and if we can get a very quick response, then we're still good.
Robin Niblett from...
this is Robin Niblett. I didn't recognize your face.
So Robin. Right at the back, where Britain is at the moment sometimes. In any case, Robin, I wanted to ask a question that maybe mirrors what François Isbourg asked at the beginning. which was interesting. He asked a question to Ursula von der Leyen whether she would support NATO enlargement. I suppose I'd flip the question and say, is this not a time to be talking about accelerating Ukrainian membership of the EU? And as we have the two leaders of these two institutions side by side, one of the biggest threats, obviously, to Russia's interest in Ukraine will be a much closer relationship with the European Union. So, Secretary General of NATO, would you support an acceleration of the process of negotiation for enlargement to Ukraine to the European Union?
It's not for me to decide. I have actually tried to convince Norwegians to join EU, and I didn't succeed. So I think I should be very careful giving advice to others. But the principle still applies. That, of course, it is for individual countries in Europe to decide whether they want to belong to NATO or they want to belong to EU, and then there is for the members of NATO to decide whether they can join our alliance, and then for the members of EU to decide whether they can join EU. That's the principle, and that is what is contested now. Because there are absolutely possible to have different views of whether NATO or the EU should have this or that new member. But this is not the issue. The issue is whether that is a decision to be made by those individual countries and the members of the organizations, or whether Russia has a veto to decide what neighbors can do or not do. That's to re-establish spheres of influence. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in going back in history. We believe in free, independent nations making their own free, democratic choices.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. It's reassuring to me, and I'm sure to many in the room, to see how well NATO and the European Union work hand in hand. Let me propose that we offer a round of applause to our two speakers. And of course, most importantly, to congratulate Jens Stoltenberg again on receiving the award. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't leave the room, because within literally seconds or a minute at maximum, we're going to have Chancellor Scholz coming in and continuing the program. So stay put if you could. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as the program will continue momentarily.